Hey y'all, and welcome back to Reed's channel. Tonight we're going to be talking about medications and specifically what is on Reed's medication list as of the beginning of 2019. So, as most of you know, Reed was diagnosed about 4 months ago, and when he was first diagnosed, he was having problems with seizure-like activity, like his hand would shake, and he was having extreme irritability, just chronic fussiness and complete inconsolability. So when we first got to the hospital, they put us on just like a Tylenol regimen, and then I think they quickly figured out that that was just not going to cut it. So then we moved to Valium, and I want to say we started off on maybe like a milliliter per every, I think it was 8 hours. Like, it was a really small dose. I think they were trying to gauge his, his metabolism and just how he tolerated medication. So, after about a week of being inpatient, we moved him to adding in Gabapentin, which is for nerve pain. And those two medications have quickly escalated to 13. We don't use all 13 at one time, so I actually had to write them on this piece of paper just so I could kind of keep track of them as we go. So he is on 1, 2, 3, 4, about 5 everyday medications. So number 1 is Valium. They, as you go through, your body automatically builds up a tolerance, and so it takes more of a drug to get the same desired effect. So number 1 on my list is Valium. He gets that every 6 hours scheduled, but then we can give it to him as needed as well. So right now his dose is about 3 milliliters every 6 hours, but we can also give him 2 milliliters as needed. So say that we've gone 6 hours and he's just having either rigidity where his hands are just clenched and he's like, his back is arched, or if he's having extreme irritability and fussiness, the Valium kind of acts as an, I would kind of call it an antispasmodic, but it's also a muscle relaxer, and it also helps with his mood. So if we go, if we get 3 hours in and he's just having a really rough day, at that point we can give him 2 milliliters before his next scheduled dose as well. So that's really helpful. Number 2 on the list is Gabapentin. So he gets Gabapentin every 6 hours, and we're at, I think, 2.8 milliliters per dose. So that is on like a strict schedule. We don't have an as needed for Gabapentin, but you probably have heard of it before, even if you don't have a child who is on it, because a lot of diabetics get it for diabetic nerve pain. And basically with Krabbe, it's my understanding that they feel these like fire-like sensations in their hands and feet, and which is kind of the same thing that I think diabetics feel with the nerve pain. So the Gabapentin is, it helps relieve that fire sensation. 3rd on the list is Tylenol. So right now he's on a 3 milliliters every 6 hours. But that's as needed. So that's the only 2 that are scheduled doses are technically just the Valium and the Gabapentin right now. He gets those on an every 6 hour basis. The Tylenol, I feel like, is really helpful when he wakes up. If we don't feel that it's like bad enough to give him an as needed narcotic like morphine, which I'll get to, then we give him the 3 milliliters of Tylenol, and I feel like it eases some of that achiness that maybe builds up throughout the night, or when we're not awake to move him every 2 hours to rotate him. So 4th on the list is Atropine. Atropine dries up his excessive secretions like the saliva. So Krabbe kids tend to drool a lot. And I think I talk about this in another video. I don't know the exact mechanism. I don't know why. I don't even actually know if that information is out there, if they even know why they drool more, because it has to do with lipid buildup, so I'm not sure why it affects their saliva, but it does. And so because it affects their saliva, they can get congested really easily, and it can get trapped in their lungs, and they can develop pneumonia and just a whole host of respiratory infections. So it's important to keep those secretions to a minimum. So atropine, he gets 1 to 2 drops about every 4 hours. That's kind of as needed though. That's not a scheduled dose. So if we see that he's having a day where it builds up more, then, we might utilize that every 4 hours. Before, we weren't really using it that much because atropine is a very potent drug. And with Reed, it made him very drowsy. Like, he would sleep for the first time we gave it to him, I think we gave him like 2 drops. And he slept he was out for like 14 hours. Like, it was scary. So, that's when we talked to the nurses about switching to, I don't know if you say it hyazine or hyazine, but it's on my list too at the very bottom. But it's also for excess secretions. We don't really use hyazine because I don't think it's that effective for Reed. So yeah, the atropine is really potent. As we've given him more of it, he seems to have built up a little bit of a tolerance, which in his case is good for that drug because it allows him to stay awake. 5th on the list, and this is the last one of like the most used medications that I would say we use pretty much on a daily basis, is morphine. Right now, Reed, we had him on a scheduled dose for morphine with the Valium and Gabapentin, and then we kind of cut that down because I just thought it was kind of too many narcotics at one time, and I didn't really feel like he needed all that. But at the time, it was scheduled 0.75 milliliters every 3 hours. And I just felt like that was a little bit much. So we talked to the nurse about it, and we got the go-ahead to use it as needed. And so morphine is like, I don't know if it's like this everywhere. I don't know if they color code it for the kids, but it's really easy to tell morphine. It's like this bright, like blue-green solution. And like I said, we just kind of use that as needed. If nothing else is working, if the Tylenol, the Gabapentin, the Valium, he's not due for anything, then we'll use the morphine. But that's kind of a last resort. Morphine is also good for breathing trouble. So I don't know why, but Krabbe kids, at some point, most of them start gasping for air. And I think morphine opens up those bronchioles in the lungs. I could be wrong about that, but whatever it does, it has an effect on their respiration as well. So I think it helps open up the lungs, and they can get a clear, deep breath, along with being an opioid, which works on those opioid receptors to cut down on their pain. These 3, actually, you know what? I want to bump this one up. So we use suppositories, and we use Pedialax, which you can find at Target. We now get it shipped to us through hospice, but I know for a fact you can get it at Target. And I wish I had brought them in here with me. They're these glycerin vials. I might take a picture of it and link it. But it's liquid, and the actual tube is about this long. And you insert it in the rectum, and you squeeze the bulb of it, and it pushes the glycerin into the rectum. And it makes it, I think it kind of stimulates the pushing response. And for Reed, that's a good thing because as the disease progresses, he has more and more trouble having bowel movement. So at this point, not only are we giving him Miralax, but we're also having to manually stimulate his bowel movements through the use of suppositories. The suppositories say from 2 to 5 years. Always talk to your pediatrician. I'm not a healthcare provider. I've taken pharmacology, but I'm not in any position to circumvent your doctor's orders, or you guys already know that typical disclaimer on YouTube. But I think it's important to say that because on the label it says use from 2 to 5 years. Reed is about to be 19 months, and we've been using it on him for a couple months now. So it's not like like set in stone. They have to be 2 years. But of course, if your child is having trouble with bowel movements, obviously talk to your doctor, call a pharmacy, talk to any type of expert, but suppositories might be for you because it's definitely helped Reed. Moving down, lorazepam and clonazepam. I actually don't have the amount that we were giving him for lorazepam. We really didn't use it that much for him. I didn't think that it had that great of an effect on him, so I didn't even really write that down. We still have it, we don't really use it. The clonazepam, from my understanding, is that it also works in conjunction with the gabapentin, which works on the GABA receptors. And that's kind of all the detail I can give you about that for right now. But the clonazepam, I want to say, is also an antispasmodic, but it's also a, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a downer, but it's a like an anti-anxiety, and that's also what lorazepam is it's an anti-anxiety. So that kind of works on their mood swings and the constant irritability. Moving down, I've talked about hyazine or hyazine. That we were giving him 4 to 7 drops about every 4 hours. Like I said, it wasn't really effective for Reed. That doesn't mean that it wouldn't necessarily be effective for your child. Promethazine. We've actually only used promethazine one time, and it's, I guess we can give it 0.25 milliliters every 8 hours. Promethazine is an anti-nausea, anti-vomiting medication. So there was one time recently, it was like maybe 2 weeks ago, that Reed, what the formula we gave him, it didn't digest and it came back up, and I felt like he was also coughing, but I felt like more might be coming up, like he might be nauseous. So we did give it to him that one time, and it worked. That, if my memory serves me correctly, is like a bright green liquid. You can't miss it. It looks very chemically. Ibuprofen. So these right here, the hyazine, promethazine, ibuprofen, albuterol, and Robifen are ones that we don't really use a lot, so they're at the bottom of the list. But ibuprofen, y'all know from taking, I think is it Advil that's ibuprofen? I want to say it is. Very similar to Tylenol. You know, you're basically just lowering the dosage for kid dosages. But for him, we have it 3 milliliters every 6 hours. That's not scheduled. That is as needed. I find that Reed responds better to the Tylenol, so we really haven't, I've maybe used ibuprofen like 3 or 4 times. We really don't use it, but it is there as a backup, which is nice. The albuterol. Albuterol, for those of you who have asthma, super common medication. Instead of doing it through an inhaler though, it's, I guess it is, it's kind of like an inhaler. You put it through the nebulizer. We have not used it yet. There was one time that Reed, like I really thought that he was, that it wasn't good. He couldn't really breathe. I got very nervous, and hospice had prior, like a month prior, sent us a nebulizer. It's really cute. It was like a little seal package, and I wish I had brought it in here with me, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't work. It's been like 3 weeks now that I've tried to exchange it through hospice. The button the turn on button like popped off when I tried to use it. And of course it was just the worst time possible because, you know, he's sitting here like he can't breathe and he's got all this congestion and the atropine just hadn't kicked in yet and he's like choking on his own saliva. And so, you know, I'm panicking, running around like Will's out of the house. And I put the oxygen mask on him, put it around his head, like break open the albuterol, which is half a vial, says every 6 hours as needed. So break open the vial, I'm like putting it in this machine, and then I go to turn it on and the button, like the spring just goes phew, and just like pops off. That was not a good feeling, but it ended up, we didn't really need it. The atropine kicked in, and I also gave him Robifen, which I'll talk about. And but I would like to have it around because what if there's an emergency, you know, like really with breathing conditions, by the time even 911 got here, it would be too late. So we're working on getting that exchanged ASAP. So albuterol, I want to say, is also a bronchodilator, opens up those blood vessels or the air sacs in the lung. I don't know, you could Google it. But that is also something that we have on board for when we get a nebulizer that works. Last on the list is Robifen. Robifen is a cough syrup. I don't know if it's also used for adults. Obviously, it's used for pediatrics. We actually use it not so much as a cough syrup, but as a decongestant. And we have like a finite amount of it. It came in a really small package. I haven't reordered anymore because it's not like a staple. We don't use it every day. And I would say probably nor should you. But that is given at 1.25 milliliters every 6 hours. Like I said, we don't use it that often, but if it's a situation where the atropine isn't really working and he gets really congested and we've tried everything else, then I will give him the 1.25, and that's also all of these except for the albuterol is through the nebulizer, which is the face mask. And then let's see, the atropine is given orally, it's given through the mouth. And then morphine is also given through the mouth. The rest of them, oh, and I forgot to say this, clonazepam is a tablet form. Tips and tricks, always talk to your pharmacist, but most medications, if they're in tablet form and your child is what they call NPO, or they can't take anything by mouth, which is what a lot of Krabbe kids get to, they lose the ability to swallow, you can, most of the time, crush up the tablet and dissolve it in water and then give it to them through their NG tube. But of course, always ask your healthcare provider. So right now we're at a total of 13. I think at this point, we're starting to see that he is building up a tolerance to the Valium and the Gabapentin. And I think we need to ask hospice about bumping those up at this point. They've already been bumped up. I want to say in the hospital, his first dose of Gabapentin was 1.4 milliliters, and now he's at 2.8. So within the past 4 months, we've doubled the Gabapentin. And I want to say, but I could be wrong, it was just kind of a whirlwind of information at first, but I want to say that the Gabapentin initially was 1.4 every 8 hours, and now we're 2.8 every 6 hours. All these things I wish I had brought in here. I'll probably just take a picture of it. This, you can probably see, it's the size, it's notebook paper. I got my journal at a, just like a Dollar Tree. Love the Dollar Tree. I'm always at the Dollar Tree. But you can, we use a journal for medication, and I actually want to start using a separate journal for feedings and water, just because it's getting harder to keep track because he's able to eat less and less, even through the NG tube. But these are just, I feel like, incredible to have on hand, especially if you're not the only caretaker, which most of us aren't. So sometimes Will and I end up on different schedules, and then sometimes his mom is in town and she also will help, you know, watch, read, and administer medications. It's very hard to keep track of the exact, you know, milliliters they've received on the exact time they got it. Days kind of blend together, you know, when you're dealing with a situation like this. And so we find it just incredibly helpful to write down the date and then the time. So right before we give him his meds, you know, like if it's my turn, I'll write down, you know, 2 p.m., GABA, Valium, and then the dosages. And to me, it's so much simpler because it lets the next person know, okay, for sure, I don't even have to go, you know, call this person if they're out. I don't have to wake them up. I can look at this notebook. We keep it in the kitchen next to the medication and his food. And you can just look at it and you automatically know the last time they got the medication and just the whole 9 yards, what they got, when they got it. And it's just so much, I think, so much less stressful knowing that, like, you're not going to OD them because you know exactly what they got when they got it. Definitely something I would suggest. And like I said, I think we're also going to implement that for the feeding schedule because at this point, you know, we've added in the MCT oil, the vitamin D. That might be it, just with the, oh, and the Miralax. So it's important to know when they get that because you don't want to over Miralax them. It's not good. So those are my tips and tricks for our medication schedule, and then also just kind of to give you an idea of what our child is on. I know a lot of Krabbe parents on the Facebook board talk about baclofen or baclofen. I don't know. I've asked our hospice nurse about it, and she's asked the doctor that she orders through several times, but for whatever reason, I haven't gotten a chance to speak to the doctor personally because it's just all done through hospice. But that particular doctor does not want to order baclofen at this point. So we're kind of, I think it's also a muscle relaxer. Right now we're doing okay with Valium. I think if it gets to the point where Valium starts getting to his, starts getting to that no-no point, then maybe we might switch to baclofen. I'm not sure. But if his meds change or if any of these values change, I would, if they go up like quite a bit, I will make a part 2 to this video, and we can just kind of maybe exchange information about what works best for each child. And I think that that's the best way to go about the Krabbe community, is just through the sharing of information. And I think that's just the best way to go about this. So if you have any different medication regimens or any different medications that I haven't mentioned, please leave a comment below, because I would definitely like to ask our doctor about that. So thank you so much as always for watching, and please hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Thank you.